The sitcom Cheers became something more than that. It transported viewers to a welcoming Boston tavern where the jokes never stopped and where everyone knew your name for 11 seasons of wonderful joy. Their chemistry was electric, and they all seemed to be living the high life. The cast seemed like a family. On TV, everything looked flawless. Things weren't nearly that sunny in reality, though. Actors on Cheers were battling demons behind the scenes that were much darker than those in the screenplay. Some were trying to hide anguish they had never spoken about. Others, despite their fame, wealth, and millions of adoring admirers, were battling legal troubles, personal tragedies, and emotional free falls from which they could never recover. Some of the actors' connections to the Fisher family expanded as the show climbed the TV history charts. And for a few of them, what followed the show's curtain call was anything but a happy ending. Regarding Cheers, no one could have predicted the immense impact that Little Boston Tavern would have on millions of people when Cheers first aired on television on September 30th, 1982. It was a simple concept, a cozy, dimly lit bar where friends could gather, unwind, and forget their troubles for a while. Despite this, one of the most iconic and touching TV comedies of all time was born out of that ease. Ted Danson's effortless portrayal of Sam Malone was the focal point of the applause. Sam embodied the stereotypically suave, smooth-talking, and sexually addicted Red Sox relief pitcher-turned-bar owner. Beyond baseball specters and shattered relationships, he was a hero with flaws. His on-screen romance with Diane Chambers, however, was more spectacular in its early years. Shelley Long brought the role of idealistic, completely out-of-place bartender Diane to life. Diane exemplified the polar opposite of Sam Brainy. Something about her presence, though, was irresistible. Everyone noticed her, whether they loved her or hated it when she read poetry. Then there was Nicholas Colasanto's Coach Sweet, my darling coach. A baseball buddy of Sam's from way back when he was lovably dense, gentle, and prone to forgetfulness. Fans adored him despite the fact that he missed the joke sometimes. His kindness and honesty won in their hearts. Anyone who Coach spoke to paid attention, though he did manage to get there after a number of tries. Young Woody Harrelson played the role of Woody Boyd, an innocent and endearing bartender from Indiana who took over for Coach after he left. If you told Woody the moon was cheese, he'd believe you since he was both silly and honest. The show needed a breath of fresh air, and his innocence provided it, especially as the plot thickened in later seasons. Conversely, Rhea Pullman portrayed Carla Tortelli, who was sassier. Carla was a woman with a fiery temper, a quick wit, and a razor-sharp tongue. She had 8 kids, a turbulent love life, and she would have none of Diane's pretentiousness. There was a mother and friend who was loyal as the day is long behind that brassy facade. The barflies were legendary even before they were. George Wendt, Norm Peterson, with his deadpan one-liners and insatiable love of beer, were basically props. Upon his arrival, the entire pub erupted in cries of "Norm, you were bound to smile," rationally speaking. John Ratzenberger, the postmaster who possessed an infinite supply of unrelated facts, many of which were dubious but consistently conveyed with conviction, and Cliff Clavin stood beside him. Seasons that followed introduced even more unforgettable personalities. Kelsey Grammer, Frasier Crane, and the urbane psychiatrist who discovered solace in beer and the noise of the bar all made an appearance. Rebecca Howe, Kirstie Alley, the down-to-earth manager whose sensitive side caught everyone off guard, came next. They created enchantment as a team. Every episode was a play about their friendship and its inevitable demise, and the bar served as the stage. Joy and romance. And after the program ended and the lights in that Boston pub finally turned out, what then? To be fair, not all of their stories had happy endings. However, we should not jump to conclusions at this stage. Behind the psychiatrist, Kelsey Grammer's sorrow. As a cultured psychiatrist who drank sherry and offered astute one-liners, Dr. Frasier Crane embodied intelligence and charming humor on screen. But behind the scenes, actor Kelsey Grammer was a sea of sadness, an addict, and a burden by an unfathomable personal tragedy. A lot of bad things had happened to Grammer before he ever got to Cheers in 1984. Karen Grammer, his younger sister, was abducted, raped, and murdered in Colorado Springs in 1975. She had just turned 18. At the age of 20, Kelsey had just begun her acting studies at Juilliard. His heart broke at the tragic event. With every performance, he carried the emotional scar of an injury that never fully healed. The tragedy, however, began and did not end with his sister. A home invasion in the Virgin Islands had resulted in the shooting and murder of his father, Frank Grammer, many years before. After that, scuba diving tragically claimed the lives of his half-brothers Billy and Stephen in 1980. Another piece of him was torn away with every tragedy. Underneath Frasier Crane's charisma and wit, Grammer was crumbling. Violent outbursts of raw anguish became commonplace by the late 1980s. In 1988, Grammer was apprehended for DUI and cocaine possession following his discovery in a parked car while under the influence. He was ordered to serve half of his 30-day sentence in prison and the other half in a rehabilitation facility. In 1990, while he was still on probation, he was caught for possession of cocaine again, this time 2 years later. That transgression led to the revocation of probation and a 90-day prison sentence. Grammer clearly wasn't battling addiction, as it became more and more obvious. The monsters that had tormented him since he was a little boy were now chasing him. Later on, he confessed that substance usage had become his only way of dealing with stressful situations. He said that he had tried to dull the agony with drink and narcotics. An outstanding, multi-award-winning actor was on display for the audience. They failed to notice the man who sat in his room, haunted by his loss, desperately clinging to life. At all costs, Grammer persisted in his career despite numerous rehab and relapse episodes. He dedicated himself fully to his job. Even though his personal world was in shambles and darkness, he managed to make everyone laugh. The life of Kelsey Grammer exemplifies this potent lesson. Because of success, no one is exempt from pain. Subtly and courageously, a man lurked beneath the smooth surface, burdened by anguish that went unnoticed by others. The cheerful bartender with a troubled family history, played by Harrelson. Woody Harrelson brought a new energy to the cheers. The innocent-looking, good-natured Indiana farm boy who won over the crowd the moment he stood behind the bar. Because he was so sincere, silly, and innocent in his depiction of Woody Boyd, admirers thought Harrelson must have been just like that in real life. But Woody's real life was even more intricate. Although Woody Harrelson was experiencing early success in 1982, he ran afoul of the law that same year. His arrest was a result of his seemingly unrestrained dancing on the busiest roadway in Columbus, Ohio. Officers tried to pull him out of traffic, but he fought arrest just enough to be charged. Not forcefully, but enough. Even though it was a small infraction, it hinted to a defiant streak beneath the carefree facade. Another, even more high-profile and deliberate, arrest would follow years later as a consequence of Harrelson's activity. He went to Kentucky in 1996, along with 4 hemp seeds, symbolizing a declaration of civil disobedience. Was that his goal? The goal was to draw attention to the state's rigid and antiquated marijuana law, which failed to distinguish between marijuana and hemp, 2 different crops. He was arrested without warning and later tried in the year 2000. Although he was victorious in that trial, the point was made. He wasn't a jester, Woody. He was prepared to risk handcuffs in pursuit of his cause. Woody Harrelson may have written some good books, but he wasn't the author of the most terrifying one. His father was the author. A famous hitman, Charles Harrelson, was Woody's dad. The 1979 conviction for the murder of U.S. John H. Wood Jr., a district judge, was the first federal judge to die in the 20th century. For $250,000, a drug dealer hired Charles to assassinate the judge prior to his sentencing. However, it was insufficient. Even though most people think Charles was driven insane or by drugs, the fact that he claimed involvement in the JFK assassination lingered with Woody. Woody revealed that it wasn't until he was 11 years old that he learned his father was a serial killer. Their connection was still intricate. While he was behind bars, Woody paid him visits and, gradually, sought to comprehend the guy responsible for so much suffering. Behind the bar, Nicholas Colasanto's soft heart was slowly dying. The cheerleader, Nicholas Colasanto, embodied the spirit of the bar. He quickly became a favorite due to his welcoming demeanor, sympathetic confusion, and wise counsel. A man fought silently against a vicious enemy behind that friendly grin: cardiovascular illness. In the mid-1970s, Colasanto received a heart disease diagnosis. He had been fighting alcoholism for years, and it had only gotten worse. He stayed dedicated to his rehabilitation after being sober in 1976 via Alcoholics Anonymous. His health was deteriorating regardless of how strong his spirit was. Season 3 of Cheers was when the rest of the cast began to notice his physical decline. He appeared weaker, less plump, and struggling to commit his lines to memory. So that he could see his cues better, the team subtly adapted by placing the cue cards out of the camera's field of view and even lighting the underside of the bar. Colasanto persisted, however, in keeping most of his co-stars in the dark about the severity of his sickness. After 1984 Christmas, his health took a nosedive. The presence of fluid in his lungs necessitated his hospital admission. He was barred from returning to work by his doctors. Coach, being the dedicated individual that he was not yet prepared to bid go. Season 3's finale featured a brief return of the actor, who had shot his last full episode in November 1984. His cameo was in a subtle opening scene that, looking back, became poignantly ironic. Then the terrible news arrived. A heart attack took Nicholas Colasanto's life on February 12, 1985. The man was barely 61 years old. Immediately, filming for Cheers came to a halt. There was a significant loss on set. Nearly 300 people attended his funeral 4 days after he passed away. Fans, cast members, friends, and relatives gathered to pay their respects to the guy who had quietly become the show's emotional rock. Behind the scenes, his recollection remained constant. In his honor, the bar was decorated with a portrait of Geronimo that had previously hung in his dressing room. In the final episode of Cheers, which takes place years after his passing, Sam subtly makes adjustments to that portrait before turning off the lights for good. There is no spoken dialogue. It is not necessary. As coach, Nicholas Colasanto was there. He was more than just that, though. He personified the role to the letter, exuding quiet strength while being loyal and caring. His passing was far from that of a typical cast member. The show's vitality dwindled at that point. Beautiful Kirstie Alley, who laughed her pain away. A tornado of charisma, vulnerability, and strength accompanied Kirstie Alley as Rebecca Howe into the bar in Cheers. She became a fan favorite right away thanks to her ambitious, neurotic, and embarrassingly inept romantic persona. Following Shelley Long's exit from the program and Nicholas Colasanto's death as coach, Alley was brought in. And somehow, she brought it back to life. Her impeccable timing, composure, and undeniable rapport with the cast members earned her an Emmy in 1991. Despite her infectious confidence on screen, Alley's real life was far more subdued. The life of Kirstie Alley was filled with travel and brilliance. In the years following Cheers, she faced a steep hill to climb in her pursuit of further success. The public's fixation on her weight fluctuations devolved into a never-ending torrent. The tabloids adored her for her beauty at the expense of her skill and acid-tipped wit, a fate that few male celebrities ever had to face. In spite of her best efforts to combat the sorrow with comedy and honesty, including the creation of her own show, the anguish persisted. There was a complicated religious life going on behind the scenes for her as well. For Alley, Scientology meant everything. Religion that she said saved her as a young adult from a deep drug addiction. However, she took a lot of heat for her publicly defending the church during public scandals, which demonstrated her unwavering devotion to the struggling church. Some spectators disengaged. Because she remained faithful in the face of adversity, she earned the respect of her peers. After her career took off in the 80s and 90s, it never fully recovered to the same level. Her personal life, spirituality, health, and lack of Hollywood appearances came under public scrutiny as gigs dried up. Still, Alley was never one to truly stop working. Reality shows like Dancing with the Stars and Veronica's Closet weren't the only places she kept popping up. She had not lost her wit, her authenticity, or her rawness. Kirstie Alley's brief and secret battle with cancer ended in December 2022 with her death. After she had passed away, her family made the announcement, stating that the cancer had only recently been discovered. Her illness came as a shock to her 71-year-old friends and followers, who had no idea she was sick at all. She was a woman who lived a life beyond what she let on, and her departure has reminded the world of that. Though she brought laughter to millions, Alley had a depth and anguish that very few understood. Her independence and modesty shone through even in her final days as she opted to remain out of the limelight. In her role as Diane Chambers on Cheers, Shelley Long exuded an air of refined warmth and quick humor. Diane won an Emmy, 2 Golden Globes, and a devoted fan base thanks to her chemistry with Sam, played by Ted Danson, and her impeccable comic timing. After she left the hit sitcom to focus on her family and other creative endeavors, things weren't always sunshine and rainbows. The film career that Long had envisioned for herself after departing Cheers in 1987 never materialized. She did produce a number of films. However, her TV celebrity was not reflected in any of them. As a result, the industry stopped paying attention and roles became scarce. This was in sharp contrast to the actress who used to make every picture she was in look better. She felt the burden of redefinition and rejection becoming heavier by the day. In 2004, after Shelley's 22-year marriage to Bruce Tyson ended, sources say she fell into a deep despair. According to what the media said was an overdose of drugs, she was hospitalized in November of that year. Was not an attempt on her life, but rather a reaction to medication taken for a back problem, as her manager indicated. Regardless, the event made an impression. The months of not eating, remaining in bed, and withdrawing from the world were supposedly compared by a friend like witnessing someone fall over a cliff. The bold grin that soars above the crowd, covered with hidden agony, was the set. After that, Shelley Long mostly stayed out of the spotlight. She has gone from appearing on every magazine cover to enjoying low-key outings with her little dog and doing grocery shopping without making a fuss. The few who did see her described her as a very different woman from her heyday, or maybe just more personal and satisfied. Still, a subtle resiliency lurks underneath the solitude. She made a brief public appearance in early 2006 to reassure her admirers that everything was well and to admit that everyone has to just keep moving forward. That heartfelt note reminded everyone that she retained the charisma and kindness that were beloved by many, even when she chose to remain alone. There is no scandal or sensationalism in Shelley Long's story. The story is one of progress, opting for a less public existence over notice and perseverance over performance. She went from stardom to inner healing. The things she leaves behind are less important than the grace with which she continues on in her own gentle manner. The ending of Cheers, a bittersweet tale. For more than 10 years, Cheers was more than just a sitcom. It became an integral element of American culture. Millions tuned in each week, seeking solace as much as humor. There, mischievous one-liners helped ease emotional pain. Lonely souls found each other, and a Boston pub became the most iconic TV location. As of 1993, though, the bar had permanently shut down. The incredible 11-season run of 275 episodes ended on May 20th, 1993. The series' conclusion was more than just an afterthought. It was the main attraction. The series finale was one of the most watched in television history, with about 84 million people tuning in. Fans were so moved by the real-life Bull and Finch pub, which served as the setting for Cheers, that they crowded the streets of Boston that evening. As a group, the actors and producers celebrated the end of an unforgettable chapter in their life in that location. A decrease in ratings was not the justification for canceling the show. The popularity of Cheers reached new heights. The real explanation was Ted Danson's choice to step down as Sam Malone. After 11 seasons on the show, he decided he needed a change after being there since the premiere in 1982. Two choices were presented to the producers: either replace the lead role or cancel the show while it was still popular. To protect the show's reputation and the camaraderie that had developed among the actors, they chose to turn it off. The taping of the series finale was a really moving experience. Supposedly, some of the actors sobbed in the intermission. No one in the studio was immune to the gravity of the situation. It was a bizarre full circle, according to Shelley Long, who had left the program after season 5, but returned for the last episode, as if something that had been undone had finally been laid to rest. The final scene had a solemn and meaningful tone. Sam Malone wishes everyone a happy night as he silently turns out the lights at the bar. There was genuine joy, not forced laughter, but a subtle recognition of endings that aren't always tidy, but are filled with love. Following Cheers' success, the majority of the cast members were unable to find other opportunities. Some might face scandal, loss, or a slump in their careers. No matter where their lives took them, Cheers will always be the one place that brought them together and defined them. It was just the performance, the story continued, because Cheers still feels like home, even after all these years. When Cheers was under fire at first glance, it appeared like the perfect way to get away from that welcoming Boston watering hole where everyone knew your name and laughing was always around the corner. Not everyone had a positive impression of it, though, as is the case with any cultural landmark. Despite its polished scripts and funny moments, Cheers was not immune to the harsh criticism that even the most beloved television shows face in today's society. Cheers' witty banter and well-developed characters were early points of praise. The show's portrayal of women was controversial among critics, especially those who identified as feminists in the 1980s. Diane Chambers was always the target of ridicule, despite her intelligence and outspokenness. Nobody could take her haughtiness seriously. Simultaneously, masculine characters that were mentally or emotionally unstable were portrayed as endearing or simply being themselves. The question arose, was Diane's intelligence too high for Cheers? Alternatively, was Cheers too unsure of how to embrace a woman of her nature? In subsequent years, Cheers faced criticism for its handling of delicate subjects, including alcoholism. Even though the show revolved on a bar and characters like Norm and Cliff were endearing mainstays there, the seriousness with which they dealt with their drinking was lacking. While many found Norm's habit of sitting on his bar stool to be hilarious, others saw it to be a stark reminder of how pervasive addiction had grown. Beyond the comedic value, the show rarely paused to reflect on the deeper meaning of the audience's reaction. It appeared like an opportunity to show the cost of the joke was lost on some viewers. The issue of inclusivity was also criticized. Cheers was ahead of its time in several ways. It introduced LGBT characters, but it also had episodes where the characters resorted to ridiculous stereotypes and jokes that would be unpopular today. Some fans felt the show might have done more to challenge societal norms, given how relatable many of the characters and events were. Next, there were the anecdotes from the backstage. After Shelley Long left the show, the media were quick to pass judgment. She was said to be quite challenging. Her departure was portrayed as selfishly excessive. She was under a tremendous amount of stress. The world assumed she could get by with just ratings and acclaim. Perhaps she had other desires besides Diane Chambers. Cheers continued even after everything. We empathized, wept, and thought deeply about it. Art does not exist in a vacuum, though, and the subtle, often overlooked response serves as a reminder of this. It reflects the world as it is, flaws and all. On occasion, the most significant legacies are those that we muster the courage to examine with greater candor and love. Cheers wasn't merely a cable program. Behind the bar that offered the promise of a place where everyone knows your name was a reflection of actual people, their true suffering and joy. It served a purpose beyond just entertainment for 11 seasons. A cultural haven, it transformed into that, providing a space where millions may feel noticed, even if it's just for half an hour every week. The cast members' personal experiences, however, shed light on a reality that differed from and was more complex than the show's comedic lines. Shelley Long was one of many who struggled under the weight of stardom and eventually hid from the public eye while she dealt with inner turmoil. Some people had to deal with a legal issue, an addiction, or tragic losses. The roles were acted with genuine emotion by every actor. Occasionally, it required giving up some of their own identity in order to deliver an outstanding performance to the audience. Not the beginning or the end, but the middle is what makes Cheers stand the test of time. Here's what transpired throughout that time. The broken friendships, minor triumphs, and deep scars that transposed from screen to real life. It was the solace of Frasier's excessive study, Carla's sass, Norm's booze, and Cliff's trivia. It was ordinary folks sticking together when everything else around them broke apart. It was more than the end of a series. It was the end of an era, when the lights flickered on that tavern in 1993. Still, Cheers was perpetual in a sense. Reruns of it are still airing. Theme tune renditions are still popular. Time and again, new generations find its enchantment. No matter how much time passes, no matter how many scandals or heartbreaks befall them, the characters never age and are always ready to welcome us with a smile and a drink. Even though everyone else has forgotten the meaning of Cheers, the bar is still open for those who do. Meanwhile, Sam Malone is patiently waiting for you to get up on a stool as he wipes down the counter. Thank you for tuning in. Please hit the like button if you were affected or astonished by this behind-the-scenes look at the Cheers cast and their tales. Plus, stay tuned for other behind-the-scenes Hollywood tales. Which Cheers moment or character is your favorite? Feel free to leave a comment. Please get in touch with us. Have an inquisitive mind and be careful until we meet again.